Have you ever wondered how our ancestors survived when there were no supermarkets, no packaged food, not even electricity to cook? They turned acorns into bread, river fish into smoky feasts, and a handful of corn and beans into meals that fed entire nations. But today, most of those recipes and the wisdom behind them have nearly vanished from American memory. In this video, we'll journey back through time to rediscover the forgotten native and Depression-era foods that kept America alive. Stay with us till the end, and if you love reviving lost flavors of our history, hit like, subscribe, and help keep these stories burning bright. 1. Corn and bean stew. Imagine standing in a smoky clay hut somewhere in the wide plains long before any supermarket existed. A large pot simmers slowly over a wood fire filled with corn kernels, beans, and chunks of squash. This wasn't just dinner, it was the heartbeat of native life. Known as the Three Sisters, these three crops grew together in harmony. The corn provided height, the beans climbed its stalks, and the squash spread below, protecting the soil. Together they created a perfect balance of nutrition and survival. The stew itself carried a soft sweetness from the corn, a creamy earthiness from the beans, and the faint scent of charred wood from the fire. Families gathered around that pot after long days of hunting or harvesting, sharing not just food but gratitude. There was no waste. Every seed, every husk had meaning. Over time, when settlers arrived and modern farms replaced hand-tended gardens, this ancient recipe faded into history. But it remains a reminder of how wisdom was once planted in every field. Can you imagine cooking a meal today where every ingredient worked together as if nature itself wrote the recipe? 2. Wild rice soup. Picture the still waters of the northern lakes, where gentle ripples reflect the sky like glass. There, native women once paddled birch bark canoes through fields of tall wild rice, bending the stalks carefully and striking them with wooden sticks so the grains would fall softly inside. That was how every kernel of manoomin, the goodberry, was gathered by hand with reverence. In the long winters that followed, wild rice soup became a source of warmth and life. The grains puffed open in boiling water, releasing a nutty aroma that mixed with the scent of onion, duck broth, or bits of venison if the hunt had been kind. This soup wasn't fancy. It was sacred, a gift from the lakes that sustained entire nations through the cold moons. When industrial farms later filled the shelves with cheap white rice, this native grain nearly vanished. Yet its taste still carries stories of the people who harvested it by paddle and prayer. If you ever hold a handful of wild rice, feel its rough shell between your fingers, could you sense the centuries of quiet survival that live within each grain? 3. Acorn bread. Under the towering oaks of autumn, when the air smelled of wood smoke and the earth turned crisp beneath bare feet, families once gathered to collect acorns by the basketful. To most settlers, they were bitter and useless. But to native people, acorns were life, a hidden harvest, waiting to be transformed. The women cracked each nut by hand, dried the kernels near the fire, and pounded them into fine meal. Then came the patient part, soaking the flour in cold stream water to wash away its bitterness. Only after that could it become dough, dense, fragrant, and slightly sweet when baked on hot stones. That bread, dark and hearty, was more than food. It carried the rhythm of survival, of patience, of respect for the forest's timing. Each loaf told a story of how nothing in nature was wasted, only misunderstood. When wheat arrived with European ships, acorn bread slowly disappeared, labeled primitive by those who never knew hunger beneath open skies. Yet even now, its flavor whispers of endurance of a people who could turn the forest floor into nourishment. Can you imagine biting into bread born not from fields but from the heart of the woods itself? 4. Smoked fish. Over fire pit down by the river banks where the fog lifted each dawn, men returned with canoes full of shimmering fish, trout, salmon, perch, each destined for the drying racks built above smoky fires. This was preservation before refrigeration, an art perfected by tribes who understood both time and flame. The fish were cleaned, salted with mineral crystals gathered from the earth and hung over slow-burning embers. For hours, the air filled with the sweet, oily scent of wood smoke, turning each piece into something golden and sacred. Children ran around the camp, their laughter mixing with the crackle of fire. The smoke rose like prayer, curling toward the stars at night. Smoked fish could last for moons, sustaining families through the lean seasons when rivers froze and game grew scarce. Later, traders and settlers would copy the method, selling smoked salmon as a delicacy, forgetting its origin. To the native families who lived it, it was never just food. It was preservation of spirit, of continuity. The smoke that once curled through the forest still carries memory. Have you ever tasted something so simple it felt like time itself paused between each bite? 5. Deer, jerky, dried venison. When the first chill of autumn swept through the trees, the hunters prepared for the long silence of winter. Venison, lean, dark, and strong, was their lifeline. After each hunt, the meat was sliced thin, rubbed with salt and wild herbs, and hung over racks beside a low fire. Smoke and wind did the rest. Over several days, the raw flesh transformed into jerky, lightweight, dry, yet full of strength. Each strip was more than protein. It was survival embodied. Travelers carried it through snowstorms and across plains, its toughness a promise that they could endure. The taste, smoky, slightly sweet from the sapwood, told stories of early mornings of bows strung tight of gratitude whispered to the deer's spirit before the first cut. When factories later learned to bottle and cure meat with chemicals, they lost something vital, the patience and reverence in the making. Jerky today may fill shelves, but not hearts. Imagine tearing a piece made by your ancestors' hands, tasting the land and wind they lived in. Could you feel their endurance echo through the chew? 6. Corn porridge, native corn mush. Before dawn, the village stirred. A pot simmered quietly over embers, ground corn water, a pinch of salt, maybe a spoon of bear fat if fortune allowed. The aroma was soft and sweet, a comfort in the chill before sunrise. This was corn mush, the morning meal of generations. Children grew up on it, elders found strength in it, and travelers carried dried meal in pouches for quick nourishment. Unlike the sugar-sweetened cereals that fill modern shelves, this dish carried the flavor of the land itself. The corn was stone ground by hand, each kernel crushed with rhythm and care. Sometimes berries or maple syrup were added for celebration, but most days it was plain, humble, sustaining pure. When European settlers adopted the recipe, they added milk and butter, softening its edges. Yet in its simplest form, corn mush remains a perfect reflection of balanced nourishment born from patience, warmth born from simplicity. In a world where breakfast now comes from boxes, can you imagine returning to a bowl that smells of firewood and dawn? 7. Bannock bread. On the vast plains, when food had to travel as far as the people themselves, bannock bread became a faithful companion. Its ingredients were few flour, water, a pinch of salt, maybe fat or berries if luck allowed. Mixed by hand and flattened into thick rounds, it was cooked directly on hot stones or in cast iron pans over campfires. The result was dense, smoky, and slightly crisp at the edges, the taste of life on the move. Though bannock came from Scottish traders, native tribes across the continent made it their own. The recipe adapted easily to what the land offered. Sometimes cornmeal replaced wheat or wild herbs scented the dough. Families shared it on long journeys, warriors packed it for hunts, and elders broke it at gatherings as a symbol of unity. In many ways, bannock bridged two worlds, the indigenous and the colonial blending necessity with invention. It remains a reminder that culture like dough can rise from mixing. Have you ever bitten into something so simple, yet felt it carry centuries of resilience beneath its crust? 8. Maple sugar treats. When winter finally loosened its grip and the trees began to weep clear, sweet sap, native families knew it was time for the maple harvest. Buckets carved from wood hung from the trunks, catching the slow drip that would soon become liquid gold. Fires burned all day and night as the sap boiled down in large kettles, turning pale and thick, the air heavy with caramel scent. Before refined sugar ever reached these lands, maple was the only sweetness. It flavored cornbread, glazed meat, and was poured onto snow to harden into delicate candy. Children waited for that moment, the soft crackle of syrup cooling in the cold air. Every drop represented patience and respect. It took nearly 40 gallons of sap to make 1 gallon of syrup. Maple sugar wasn't just food, it was celebration, a sign that the harsh season had passed. Even today, each golden drop reminds us of that bond between people and trees. Next time you pour syrup over pancakes, can you taste the echo of the forest that once gave joy after a long, cold silence? 9. Potato peel soup. In the leanest years, when cupboards stood nearly empty, even the peels of a potato could become salvation. Scrubbed clean and simmered with onions and a pinch of salt, they transformed into a thin but comforting broth. This was the food of survival, born from hands that refused to waste what the earth provided. During the Great Depression, government posters encouraged families to reuse every scrap, echoing the same principle native people had lived by for centuries: respect for every gift of the land. The smell of simmering peels might not have promised luxury, but it whispered dignity. Mothers stirred those pots with quiet strength, knowing each spoonful meant one more night of warmth. Today, in a world where abundance often leads to waste, this humble soup feels like a lesson. It asks us to look again at what we throw away and see the life still hidden within. Can you imagine finding gratitude in something as simple as a handful of potato skins? 10. Perpetual soup, the communal pot. In old kitchens, there was a pot that never truly emptied. Each day, new ingredients joined. What remained: a bone, a few wilted greens, maybe water from rinsed grains. The pot simmered endlessly at the back of the fire, deepening in flavor with every addition. Families called it perpetual soup. Native tribes once had their own version too, a communal pot, where hunters, gatherers, and travelers each contributed something small for the good of all. The soup represented more than thrift. It symbolized belonging. No matter how little one had, there was always enough to share. Its scent filled the home with quiet hope, a promise that tomorrow would be fed by today's care. Modern life with its packaged meals and single servings has lost that rhythm of sharing. Yet perhaps what we hunger for most isn't the taste itself, but the togetherness it carried. Imagine a world where every meal began with someone asking, "What can we add for everyone?" 11. Water pie. During the dark years of scarcity, when buttermilk and eggs were luxuries, creativity became a form of courage. Out of that courage came water pie, a dessert built from almost nothing. A baked crust waited while a mixture of water, sugar, a touch of flour, and a drop of vanilla turned in the oven into a glistening custard. It wasn't fancy, but it shimmered with defiance. Mothers baked these pies to remind their families that even in hunger, sweetness could exist. The smell of caramelized sugar filling a cold kitchen gave comfort far beyond its calories. For many, the memory of that humble pie stayed longer than any feast. Few will admit their grandparents once made water pie. Poverty carried shame, but that dish was an act of love disguised as dessert. It said, "We will make do, and we will smile doing it." In times when abundance feels empty, perhaps that forgotten pie still holds the purest flavor of all resilience. 12. Cabbage and sausage stew. In the toughest winters, when the snow piled against cabin doors and fresh produce was a dream, cabbage became the working family's savior. Cheap, sturdy, and slow to spoil it, met the flame beside a few slices of sausage or salt pork, filling the air with smoky sweetness. Each bubbling pot was a reminder that nourishment didn't have to be costly to be rich. European immigrants brought the habit, but the soul of the dish resonated with native values, using what was available, wasting nothing. Cabbage leaves softened into silk, absorbing the fat from the meat and transforming into a meal that could last for days. The stew might not have been elegant, but its warmth carried hope through bitter months. Every bowl served around that table told the same story, survival through simplicity. When you smell cabbage simmering today, can you feel the echo of a hearth where love and resourcefulness once shared the same flame? 13. Rice and beans, Monday. Across the South, there was a tradition. Mondays meant laundry, and laundry meant rice and beans. It was the perfect meal for a day of endless work, cheap filling, and needing little attention. Dried beans soaked overnight, then simmered for hours beside a pot of white rice. The scent of salt, pork, onions, and bay leaves drifted through the house while shirts dried on the line. That rhythm of labor and nourishment mirrored native customs of shared effort and reward. Beans and rice together formed complete protein, a scientific truth discovered long before laboratories proved it. It was balance born from intuition. Families ate in shifts sometimes, with neighbors dropping by to trade stories or help fold linens. This simple dish became a weekly ritual of community. Modern life has forgotten those slow Mondays, but perhaps that's what we miss most, the sound of pots bubbling while life moved at the pace of care. 14. Cornbread and pinto beans. If the South had a soul, it would be found in a skillet of cornbread and a pot of pinto beans. Cornbread, golden and crusty, soaked up the bean broth known as pot liquor, a name spoken with affection. Together they formed a meal of humble perfection, one that stretched across generations and incomes. Corn, the sacred crop of native ancestors, found new life in this pairing. The beans provided strength, the bread warmth, and the two together whispered gratitude to the land that birthed them. Even leftovers were cherished, fried into cakes the next morning with coffee. This dish didn't need luxury. It thrived on love. It proved that nourishment wasn't about excess, but balance between earth and effort, hunger and gratitude. Next time you break a piece of cornbread, think of the hands that once grew the corn, shelled the beans, and built a meal that tasted like resilience itself. 15. Baked potatoes in fire coals. Long before ovens hummed and timers beeped, families cooked with instinct and flame. On cold nights, potatoes were buried in the glowing coals of a wood fire, their skins crisping to black while the inside softened into buttery cloud. Children sat nearby, poking the embers with sticks, watching sparks rise like tiny stars. When the potatoes emerged, they were split open, steam curling into the night air. A pinch of salt, maybe a spoon of lard or leftover stew, that was enough to turn simplicity into comfort. These fire-baked potatoes warmed not just bellies, but hearts. It was food that belonged to both worlds, the native hunter's campfire and the settler's cabin hearth. Cheap, steady, and honest. In the glow of the coals, you could taste the same truth both peoples knew, that warmth shared was wealth enough. 16. Homemade mac and cheese. Before boxed dinners and instant powders filled grocery aisles, mac and cheese was an act of care, not convenience. In small kitchens warmed by coal stoves, grandmothers stirred pots with patience, butter melting into flour, milk slowly thickening, and cheese grated by hand. The scent of it filled the home with warmth, the promise of comfort after long days of work. In the 1930s, when meat was scarce, this dish became a quiet substitute, a way to give children protein and joy from a few humble ingredients. Families baked it until the top turned golden and crisp, breadcrumbs crackling under the spoon. Each bite tasted of thrift and love, not luxury. There was pride in making something hearty from nearly nothing. Today's versions, rich with truffle oil and fancy cheeses, have forgotten their roots. Yet somewhere in that creamy sauce lies the spirit of every woman who made do and still created beauty. Do you remember when a simple casserole could make the whole family gather before the oven, waiting for that first bubbling sound? 17. Biscuits and gravy. In the quiet mornings of the southern plains, the smell of fresh biscuits meant one thing. The day had begun with gratitude. Made from flour, lard, and a bit of milk, if there was any left, these biscuits puffed in the oven, soft inside, golden outside, but the true heart of the meal was the gravy. Fat saved from last night's meat was whisked with flour and water, turning into a creamy sauce that poured like silk over the biscuits. It was a working family's breakfast, heavy enough to face the day, cheap enough to make every morning. When times were hardest, pepper replaced, meat tricking the eye and warming the tongue. To many, it tasted like survival itself. Even diners today serve it as a piece of heritage, though few realize it began in kitchens where every crumb was precious. One bite, and you can almost hear the skillet hiss and the coffee percolate. Food like this didn't just feed, it comforted. It turned scarcity into satisfaction and worry into warmth. Could a single meal today still carry that kind of quiet hope? 18. Egg salad sandwiches. There was a time when eggs were the family's treasure. Cheap, filling, and endlessly versatile, they bridged the gap when meat was rare. On Sunday nights, mothers boiled them, peeling each shell with care. The chopped eggs were mixed with homemade mayonnaise oil, whisked by hand, mustard for tang, chopped pickles for crunch. Spread thick between two slices of bread, the egg salad sandwich was simple but rich both in taste and meaning. During wartime rationing, it became the workers' lunch, packed in wax paper and tucked into lunch pails beside thermoses of coffee. The flavor was familiar, comforting, creamy, salty, with the faint sweetness of pickle brine. Children grew up on it, fathers relied on it. Even without abundance, the table felt full. Today it's often dismissed as plain, but that plainness was once dignity. It said, "We will eat well no matter what." Maybe that's why one bite can still summon the smell of home kitchens and laughter echoing through screen doors on summer afternoons. What if we treated simplicity with the same respect again? 19. Tuna casserole. In the 1940s, a small metal can changed the rhythm of American dinners. Canned tuna, cheap, convenient, and safe without refrigeration, became the star of a new kind of meal, the tuna casserole. Housewives stirred tuna with egg noodles and canned cream of mushroom soup, then topped it with crushed crackers and baked it until the edges browned and the house smelled of comfort. This wasn't extravagance, it was invention. At a time when money was tight and refrigerators were rare, this meal fed six for less than half a dollar. It offered warmth, protein, and the illusion of luxury in hard times. For returning soldiers and weary families, it tasted like stability, like life finding its normal rhythm again. Though modern versions may seem outdated, that bubbling dish still represents gratitude. Every bite says, "We made it through." Can you picture the kitchen table radio, humming steam rising from the casserole, and feel that small, perfect piece? 20. Stuffed peppers. In gardens behind modest homes, bell peppers glowed like lanterns in the late summer Sunday. When harvest came, none went to waste. The largest were sliced open and filled with rice, minced meat, and spices, then baked slowly in tomato sauce until tender. The smell, sweet pepper, roasted tomato, and savory filling drifted out windows and down small town streets. Stuffed peppers were the cook's clever answer to scarcity. A single pound of ground beef could stretch to feed an entire family when mixed with breadcrumbs or leftover rice. For many immigrant and native families, it became a symbol of care, a meal made from what the earth and labor provided. Around the table, the colors of red and green brightened even the leanest nights. Each pepper carried not just flavor, but love, measured in spoonfuls. In a world of fast meals, imagine taking the time to fill and bake each one by hand. Wouldn't food taste different if patience were still an ingredient? 21. Beef stew with root vegetables. When the air turned sharp and the days grew short, beef stew was a family's refuge. Made from the cheapest cuts of meat, tough sinewy pieces that needed hours of slow simmering, it transformed through patience alone. Potatoes, carrots, and onions joined the pot, their sweetness melting into the broth until the whole house smelled of comfort and promise. This stew was the art of making time do the work. Even the poorest households could create a meal that felt rich, stretching leftovers for days. Bread dipped in the thick sauce became a ritual of gratitude. Around the table, conversation softened, worries lifted, and warmth spread as steady as the steam from each bowl. What made it beautiful wasn't the meat, but the waiting, the trust that small things given enough care could become something worth remembering. Maybe that's why even now, one whiff of slow-cooked stew can bring tears to your eyes, not from the onions, but from the memory of being cared for. 22. Cabbage roll steam rose from the kitchen as large green cabbage leaves softened in boiling water. On the table, a bowl weighted rice, minced meat, salt, and maybe a handful of herbs from the yard. Each leaf became a tiny bundle of hope, rolled carefully and placed into a pot of tomato sauce to simmer slowly through the afternoon. Cabbage rolls were a gift of patience, feeding many from very little. Brought to America by Eastern European immigrants, the dish found kinship with native values, nothing wasted, every resource used with respect. Families in mining towns, farmhouses, and reservations alike made it their own. Some used wild rice instead of white, others replaced meat with beans when times were lean. As they cooked, the sweet smell of tomato and cabbage filled the air, wrapping the home in warmth. Around the table, those rolls became more than food. They were symbols of endurance, of cultures blending and surviving together. In a single bite, you could taste both hardship and pride. Can you imagine how something so humble could hold so many stories? 23. Tater tot casserole. By the 1950s, America had entered the age of convenience. Freezers hummed in kitchens and cans lined the shelves like trophies of progress. Yet even in this new era, the spirit of thrift remained. From it came the tater tot casserole, a patchwork meal built from leftovers, canned soup, and frozen potatoes. Ground beef browned in a skillet met a can of cream of mushroom soup layered beneath neat rows of tater tots. As it baked, the smell was pure comfort, rich, salty, nostalgic. Church potlucks, community gatherings, and family reunions all had at least one version. It wasn't fancy, but it was love in a casserole dish. This was food that connected generations, from the grandmothers who stretched meat to the children who grew up on convenience. Every bite was a bridge between necessity and nostalgia. Maybe that's why even now it's impossible to see golden tater tots without feeling a little warmth in your chest. 24. Peanut butter and wild berry jam. For countless children, a peanut butter and jelly sandwich meant home. But long before processed jars filled supermarket aisles, its roots lay in simple foraging and preservation. Families gathered wild berries, chokecherries, huckleberries, blueberries, simmering them down into thick sweet jam to save the taste of summer. Peanut butter, introduced in the early 20th century as an affordable protein, joined that wild sweetness perfectly. Spread on homemade bread, it became a portable meal, soft, salty, and rich in memory. For Native communities living close to the land, it felt like a continuation of an older tradition, using nature's gifts with gratitude. During hard times, it fed school children and workers alike. It was the taste of simplicity, of care packed between slices. Even today, its balance of sweet and salty feels timeless. When you bite into one now, can you taste the forests and fields that once provided those berries to pass, quietly lingering in every mouthful? 25. Fried rice leftovers. In humble kitchens across America, yesterday's rice was never thrown away. Spread on a tray to dry, it waited for transformation. The next evening, it met a hot pan, a splash of oil, and whatever bits were left, scrambled eggs, chopped vegetables, or tiny scraps of meat. What emerged was fried rice, a dish of reinvention. Though often credited to Asian immigrants, its soul spoke the same language. As Native and Depression-era cooking waste, nothing makes something from anything. The sizzle of rice hitting iron, the savory aroma rising with steam, these were the sounds and smells of resourcefulness. It wasn't about luxury, but rhythm, a daily reminder that food had life beyond one meal. Each plate carried pride in making do. Maybe that's the secret we've forgotten today, surrounded by abundance yet disconnected from gratitude. What if every grain of rice reminded us how many hands had labored to bring it there? 26. Grilled cheese and tomato soup. There was a time when the simplest meal could feel like a feast. During the Great Depression, bread and cheese became luxuries to be used wisely. Families learned to stretch them, a few slices of cheese between buttered bread toasted until golden and crisp. Served with a bowl of warm tomato soup, often from a can, it became a meal that fed both body and spirit. The pairing was perfect, the salty crunch of the sandwich meeting the tangy sweetness of the soup. Children dipped their sandwiches into the red broth, leaving trails of melted cheese behind. For many, it was the taste of safety during uncertain times, warm, familiar, and forgiving. Even now, diners across America serve the same combination. It's nostalgia on a plate, a small miracle of simplicity. The next time you hold a hot sandwich over a steaming bowl, remember the kitchens that turned scarcity into comfort and gratitude into flavor. 27. Spam and eggs breakfast. When refrigeration was a luxury and war rationing made fresh meat scarce, a new miracle appeared on store shelves. Spam. Canned, salted, and shelf-stable, it became the heartbeat of countless American breakfasts. Sliced and fried until golden, its edges crisped and popped in the pan, sending out that unmistakable salty scent. Served beside scrambled eggs, it gave working families the energy to start the day. Soldiers carried it overseas, farmers packed it for the fields. For Native and rural communities far from big cities, Spam meant security protein that lasted through lean months. It may seem humble now, but in those days it symbolized survival and ingenuity. Even after the war, its presence on the breakfast table reminded people that food wasn't about status, but sustenance. When you hear that sizzle, you're not just cooking meat, you're reheating history. 28. Ramen with egg drop, imported from Japan in the 1950s. Instant ramen found a new life in American kitchens, especially among those who understood how to stretch a dollar. With just boiling water, it offered warmth, comfort, and speed. But the clever cook knew how to make it more. A beaten egg stirred into the hot broth formed silky ribbons of protein, Chopped scallions or bits of leftover vegetables added color and nutrition. In native and working class homes alike, it became a creative base proof that even packaged food could still carry the soul of survival. That bowl of steaming noodles, fragrant with broth and memory, carried a quiet truth survival adapts. It learns, borrows, and blends. One spoonful and you could taste the meeting of world's ancient and modern, East and West poverty and perseverance. 29. Spaghetti with canned tomato marinara. When Italian immigrants arrived in America, they brought with them the art of turning simple ingredients into joy. Canned tomatoes, cheap and available year-round, met garlic, basil, and a pinch of patience to become marinara sauce. Tossed with boiled spaghetti, it created a meal that felt rich, though it cost just a few cents. Native and rural families quickly embraced it, drawn to its warmth and thrift. The simmering pot became a gathering place, the air thick with tomato and memory. Bread mopped up every trace of sauce, leaving clean plates and full hearts. It wasn't just a recipe, it was proof that generosity could be made from scarcity. Long before comfort food was a phrase, this was it. In a world rushing past homemade meals, maybe a pot of slow-cooked spaghetti still holds the secret that love-like flavor deepens with time. 30. Shakshuka eggs in tomato sauce. From Middle Eastern immigrants came a dish that fit seamlessly into America's story of survival shakshuka. Simple and soulful, it began with onions and garlic sizzling in a pan, followed by tomatoes stewed down into a thick, spicy sauce. Eggs were cracked directly into the bubbling mixture, their whites turning creamy, while the yolks stayed golden. For families who could afford only eggs and canned tomatoes, it was a revelation, hearty, colorful, and full of life. Native cooks saw its kinship with one-pan stews that had sustained their ancestors for centuries. It was food made for sharing, served with bread, torn by hand and passed around the table. Its beauty lay in its balance, humble ingredients made radiant through care. As the sauce simmered and the eggs set, the room filled with warmth and quiet joy. Shakshuka wasn't just a meal, it was proof that flavor like survival knows no borders, just about survival. It was love measured in spoons, patience stirred into pots, and wisdom passed down quietly from one generation to the next. From the Three Sisters stew to the smoky taste of riverfish and the humble bowls of Depression-era soup, each dish told a story of strength, gratitude, and balance with the earth. These meals connected families, tribes, and strangers. They taught that no ingredient was too small, no moment too ordinary to carry, meaning every simmering pot, every loaf baked by hand whispered the same message, that simplicity can hold more soul than luxury ever will. So as you return to your own kitchen tonight, maybe let a little of that spirit guide, your hands cook slowly, share freely, and remember where flavor truly began. If these stories stirred your heart, hit like and subscribe to keep our shared history alive. And tell us below which forgotten meal reminded you of your grandparents, your roots, or your idea of home. Because every comment you leave keeps these memories warm for one more generation.